Hey y'all, I'm Sunny Shell, and tonight we're going to discuss the Facebook group Vaccine Talk. So sit back, buckle up, and let's get to the sunny spot on Skeptic Haven. Hey everybody, so glad you could join us. I want to introduce our guest tonight, Kate Bilowitz. Kate, thank you for coming on tonight.
Hi, Sunny. Thank you so much for having me.
So, how about you just tell everyone just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am 36 years old and I work in real estate. And about 6 years ago, I started a Facebook group called Vaccine Talk. This was originally designed as a group for people of all stances on vaccines to come together and discuss the topic civilly and in an evidence-based way. I don't have a scientific or medical background. This is just something that was a personal interest to me as a mother of a young child, now 2 young children. And I saw a lot of people discussing vaccines online. I wanted to find out a little bit more about what the controversy was all about, if there even was a controversy. And, it grew out of that, grew out of a little hobby that I had, and then, kind of became its own thing.
So that was one thing I was going to ask you was why did you start Vaccine Talk? Now, I know you've been on NPR, you have been written up in I believe it was the New York Times and Washington Post.
Yes. That's right.
And so in those articles, it talked about how kind of why you started Vaccine Talk aside from just going into other groups, because there are groups that talk about vaccines.
Yeah, so there are a lot of
transition.
Right. There are a lot of groups on Facebook that talk about vaccines from all different points of view. When I originally got into the vaccine, debate, if you will, I found a lot of strictly pro-vaccine groups, and I found a lot of strictly anti-vaccine groups. So it was interesting for me to join both and kind of see what people were talking about on either side of the issue. But there really wasn't a good place for both sides to communicate with each other. And, we tried it a couple different ways. There was a group that I had been in years ago that kind of tried to do the same thing. And, it was doing it pretty well, but we were finding that most of the people who would join the group who were strictly anti-vaccine would leave. They didn't know how to have an evidence-based debate. So what we really tried to do with Vaccine Talk was we tried to do something completely different, which was we were going to have a group that was civil and evidence-based. So nobody could go in there and just start yelling or hurling insults at each other. Everybody has to remain civil in order to stay in the group. And everything that they say in there has to be backed up with evidence. So you can't just come into the group and say something and then not back it up. We noticed that a lot of what's posted online as far as, anti-vaccine information really doesn't have a lot of evidence behind it. And, with our group, we can look at the evidence that's out there and we can help people determine what is a good source, what is a bad source, what should they be looking at when they're trying to make this decision for themselves or for their family. And we didn't really think there was a place on Facebook where you could do that before Vaccine Talk.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Anytime that I've been in any group, especially where you have strong opinions on things, it can get really testy, and people can get banned or just become vitriolic. Yeah. So if someone wanted to join Vaccine Talk, are there criteria that they have to follow in order to join?
Yeah, there are really basic criteria. I mean, pretty much we are open to everybody, but we do expect people to be honest in the group and about themselves when they join. So we ask them up front, what is their current stance? Are they pro-vaccine? Are they anti-vaccine? Or are they on the fence, somewhere in the middle? We also want them to be completely honest about their background. If they have if they're claiming that they have a medical or a scientific background, we do verify that. So we really want to stand by the fact that the people in our group are who they say they are. And if we find somebody who is representing themselves as somebody who is a medical professional or a scientist, and we find out that they're not that, we don't allow them to stay in the group. Other than that, we're pretty much open to everybody. We don't allow people who are under the age of 18 because some of the content that gets discussed is of an adult nature. Not a lot, but it is there, and we don't want to be watching what we say around children. Also, we don't allow people with brand new profiles. That kind of cuts down on spammers and trolls and bots and things of that nature. But other than that, we're pretty much open to everybody.
So that kind of makes me wonder about your moderators, because in order to be able to moderate this type of a group, you must have quite a few moderators.
We do. We have a wonderful team of moderators. There's a kind of hovers around 30 moderators, and they're from all over the world. The founders of the group, I've co-founded the group with my co-admin, Lori Klein, who lives in Arizona. We're all kind of founders are kind of on the West Coast of the United States. But since we are an international group, we now have moderators in, I think it's 7 different countries. We have them in Australia, Europe, a couple of different places in Europe. And we're always looking for more people from Australia. So
wow. How many people do you have in the group?
So there's close to 80,000. I think we're hovering right around 78,000 right now. Obviously, after COVID happened, our numbers ballooned quite a bit. We experienced steady growth even before COVID, but up until the COVID health crisis happened, after that we really noticed an increase in our numbers.
Wow. So when looking at the moderators and your members, you had mentioned about how if they say that they have a degree, or are professionals, they kind of have to prove that. So how many of the moderators, or are any of the moderators members of the healthcare profession?
Yeah, so some of them are. We do have, nurses and scientists and other healthcare professionals on our moderator team, and as well as just members in the group. But our moderators, they don't use their status as a medical professional to be a moderator. Moderators can be from any background. I have a background in real estate. I don't have a scientific background, and that's the case for many of our moderators as well. We really try to take an approach to moderating of being, unbiased. We're not here to tell people what to say or how to have the discussion. We're just here to provide them the platform to have it. So really all we're there to do as moderators is to make sure that people are following the rules and step in if they're not, as needed. But we're not there to drive the conversation.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about how the group operates then. I'm just curious about how members interact and how you make sure that the moderators are doing what they need to be doing. So can you describe it just a little bit?
Yeah, so we are a pretty heavily moderated Facebook group. We do have a lot of rules, and we do expect our members to follow them, and we moderate accordingly. So we're not one of those free-for-all groups. There are places like that out there on Facebook, but we're not one of them. The main rule number 1 would be civility. So we do expect that everybody is civil to each other at all times, and that includes name calling, insulting, harassment, anything that's not civil. Like we want it to be like you're having a discussion at the dinner table, not like a food fight. So that's the main rule for our moderators. We operate kind of on a what we call like a not quite a 3-strike rule, because we have a little bit more strikes than that, but it's like your first offense might be a warning, and then your second offense you will get a 12-hour suspension or mute. After that, it will go to 24 hours, then 3 days and 7 days, 14 days, and then eventually 28 days, and then banned. So we really give people a lot of chances, to follow those rules. Another big one is that people have to provide their evidence when asked. So if somebody comes into the group and they say, I don't know, like this vaccine, it causes this illness, then, they better have a source saying that, for why, because somebody can come along and say to them, hey, provide your evidence for that. And then if they don't provide their source within 24 hours, that's against the rules. So they're either going to get muted, or if they've done it repeatedly, then they're going to get banned. So that's really key to keeping the conversation, where we want it to be is making sure that people are discussing everything civilly and making sure that the conversation is evidence-based.
So whenever someone posts does it automatically show up, or do you guys moderate every post?
Yeah, we moderate every post. So we have a pretty strict posting guidelines too. We want people to not just post a link. We want them to come in there and give us a question to answer. Ultimately, we are a discussion/debate group. So if somebody's going to post in the group, we don't want them to just post a statement. We want them to give us a question for the group to answer. We don't allow links in the actual post because that can sometimes trigger Facebook algorithms, which I know you and I will be talking about Facebook algorithms in a little bit and our challenges with that. But that's the main posting guideline is, we really want it to be a discussion group. We want you to give us a question to answer. And then that really kind of boosts engagement on the posts as well.
So when someone posts, like you said, they have, this vaccine causes this illness, they don't necessarily have to post their source at that time. It's if they're asked, if someone says, I want to see the source.
Yeah. So if, for example, if we're on a thread and, there's people discussing back and forth and one person says, well, I heard that this vaccine causes this illness, then it would be up to the members in the group to say, I would like to see the citation for that. And our members are very good about that, are very good at asking for citations. And it's on both sides. Pro-vaccine people get asked for citations all the time. And we really encourage that because, we're sharing that evidence with the rest of the group. And that's how people learn.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so whenever someone posts their source, the question that I had asked was how do moderators determine if a source is credible or not, but I may have worded that wrong because it sounds like the members in the discussion kind of determine whether the source is credible.
You're exactly right. Yeah. So as moderators, we try to really, keep our own personal feelings out of it. We're not there to determine if the source is credible or not. We really leave that up to the group members. And what's great about our group is we have a ton of what we call our experts who are 100% volunteers. They're just people who joined the group for whatever reason and volunteer their time helping educate people about vaccines. So we have people from all different aspects of the medical and scientific profession. We have researchers, we have doctors, nurses, we have somebody who is expert on the blood-brain barrier, which is something that a lot of people haven't even heard of, but that's his area of expertise. We have somebody who has worked on writing inserts for vaccines, so we have people who are really knowledgeable and really credible, and they, bless their hearts, they just volunteer their time to the group. They don't get paid for that. They just do it because they want to do it and they want to educate people. So we rely on our experts a lot. But like I said, anybody can be in the group, and anybody can join the discussion about vaccines. You don't have to be an expert to be passionate about vaccines, and you don't have to know anything about it going into it. You just have to have an openness to learn.
So that's one interesting thing that when I've been in different discussions, I used to be involved in a lot of political topics on Facebook. This was years ago before I realized that it didn't help my sanity very much. But when I was on there, even if you start out having a fairly civil conversation, if someone says, I want to see, citation on that, and someone posts their citation and then someone else says, well, that's not credible. And then it can end up getting the dander up really quickly, Yeah. And so with this group, how do you keep people able to accept constructive criticism, focused on the criticism of the source instead of them taking it like it's a personal criticism? If I'm making sense in what I'm asking.
You're definitely making sense. Yeah, it is hard because for some people, they're never going to be able to get past that. They're never going to be able to separate their belief system from their identity. What we've seen happen in the group when people have, changed their minds about vaccines, they are people who are able to, detach that, to look at the evidence on its face and not identify so much with being pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine as part of their personality. As moderators, what we do is if we notice when things are getting heated, we can step in, we can close the thread, we can start handing out mutes if people are breaking the rules. But ultimately, there are going to be members who it's not going to work for them. The way that the group's set up, they're not going to be able to differentiate, that to be able to detach themselves from their belief system. I would definitely recommend to everybody that, if you feel really strongly about something, you should look at, what the other side is saying and look at the evidence, on its face. I really encourage people to do that and not to get caught up in identifying, as a member of a particular group. And that definitely goes for politics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so refreshing to hear that there is Facebook there's some great things with Facebook, but it can also have problems. And it's really refreshing to know that there is a group like, especially as important as this topic is, actively trying to have those civil conversations and kind of combat some of that misinformation and help people to figure out how to do that. Do you have anyone on your group that talks about how to discern a credible from a uncredible source? Do they have discussions like that, just on a generic level?
Those conversations actually come up quite a bit. We really do talk a lot about when people post sources, we talk a lot about what makes a source credible, how to identify, where it's coming from, maybe who is, paying for that particular website, maybe if somebody has a financial interest in whatever they're trying to say. We really do look at that a lot. And, somebody who's been doing this for a long time, I can identify bad sources really quickly. But when you're new to this, if you're a brand new parent and you're thinking about vaccines for your baby for the first time in your life, some of these sources, they look legit. It's really hard to tell what's a good source and what's not. And I think that's where a group like ours really can help people, because we can really educate people on what to look for and how to identify, how to find good information. And my hope is that people will take those skills that they're learning in the group and apply them to the rest of their lives, start looking at other things critically. Maybe they have belief systems that, are not based in evidence and maybe need to reevaluate them. So that's kind of my hope, that people will learn from the group and apply it to their lives.
That's excellent. I think that's just a wonderful thing. The other thing about this is, even when some of the credible sources, especially when we're talking about, epidemiology and, biology and stuff, if you look at some of the credible sources, it can often talk above people's heads.
Yeah.
And people may not understand, how to look at a peer-reviewed scientific paper. Those are not easy things to read and to pull out the right information. And having some of those experts in the fields as part of those members, I would imagine that would help with kind of parsing through some of that meatier data.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. I mean, I even, go to the group sometimes for help with understanding, scientific papers or new research that's come out. It's very difficult as a layperson to read some of this stuff and really grasp it and understand it. So, we rely on people who dedicate their lives to knowing how to do that, and they can kind of break it down for us lay people in terminology that we're going to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to take a quick break from our discussion, and I want to thank everyone who is in the chat. I've just been kind of looking through here. We have Kathy Humanist, Aunt Jur. Let's see, we have, of course, Wes is in here. Shane is in here. I don't know who Shane is. We have Sexy Sniper Panda. That's a great name. Love that name. Farron Salas is in there. Hey, Farron. So good to see you here tonight. I know I'm probably missing some others. I just wanted to go through and say hello to some of those that are in. If you have a question for our guest, please be sure and put it in the chat, and I will get on to that. Oh, I just saw Uncle Beck. Hey, Uncle Beck. I see your hello. And Air. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But we're just really glad to have all of you, watching and ask those questions. As a matter of fact, I think I did see a question from the audience. Let me pull that up. So Javier Jara, I'm not sure if I said that right, so please let me know if I got that wrong. Said in the U.S., polio is reappearing. So in your group, are you guys touching on that particular problem?
Yeah, it's definitely come up. We do have threads about polio reappearing in the United States. Unfortunately, there are communities in the United States that have very low rates of childhood immunizations. And those communities kind of become pockets, little clusters. We saw it in the measles outbreak that happened back in 2014 around that. So when you get a cluster of people who are all unvaccinated, the disease can really gain a foothold and spread. And the way to combat that would be to try to increase vaccination rates across the board, and especially in those communities that are under vaccinated. And really that's where, vaccine advocacy, it plays a big role. We really want to try to reach those groups and, help them, become educated about vaccines.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a really big problem. I think we've seen not just with polio, but some other ones that I wonder if we'll end up having like smallpox or something like that come back. Anytime that you have fewer vaccines or people who just don't get those vaccines, it can cause some of that stuff to come back. And that's devastating, really.
It's very scary. Yeah, it is.
So, what are some of the most common questions or concerns that members ask? I think that's a great follow-up to the viewer question.
Yeah, so right now we're still seeing a lot of discussion around COVID. That's definitely top of mind for most people. And people right now are not only deciding whether to get vaccinated themselves, but now that vaccines have been approved for children as young as 6 months, people are deciding whether or not to get their children vaccinated. So as a parent, it is a little bit scary. It's a newer vaccine, although the technology is not that new, but the vaccine itself is new and people are a little bit scared of new things. So we're really seeing still mostly the main topic of discussion in the group is COVID. And I expect that will continue for a while. We do get, just a lot of questions also about the childhood vaccine schedule. That's really how the group started. We started well before COVID, and we originally pretty much exclusively talked about the childhood vaccine schedule. So if you're not a parent of a young child, you may not know, but little kids get many vaccines starting from birth. They actually get their first shot, usually on the day they're born. And it can be a little bit overwhelming for parents. And there's a lot of misinformation floating around out there about the childhood vaccine schedule. So I expect we will continue to see many questions from new parents about the childhood vaccine schedule.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. That used to be the biggest topic of discussion. Another one that was starting to get a lot of discussion was the HPV virus. Because they were recommending, first it was recommended for girls, and now they have it recommended for everybody right around puberty mark. And that can be very scary for people to think, okay, what does this vaccine do, and what are the side effects? And because when you're going through puberty, your whole body is changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure that can be
it's definitely something that parents are concerned about. And you also have a lot of misinformation floating around out there about the HPV vaccine. And I think a lot of people, because they know that HPV is a sexually transmitted disease, there's that whole aspect too, where, people don't want to think about their child, growing up and becoming, sexually active someday. It's a lot for parents. So yeah, it is something that we do see a lot of people who are hesitant about vaccines do have questions specifically about that one.
Well, you had said that COVID really made your numbers explode. And so can you tell us a little bit more about how COVID has impacted the group?
Yeah. So at first, we started just getting a lot of people wanting to talk about COVID, the virus. And, we're not really, we're a vaccine group. We're not a general science group. We actually do have a sister group called Science Talk, which is where we direct our members to talk about, things that are not specifically vaccine related. So originally when COVID first started, there wasn't a vaccine for COVID. So we didn't really have much for our members to discuss. And we were kind of almost really discouraging those conversations just because we didn't have really anything for them. Once the COVID vaccine started becoming a topic of conversation, and especially once it was developed and authorized for emergency use, that became the main focus of our group. And that continues to this day. And it's something that I think all of us moderators, everybody was affected in varying ways by the COVID health crisis. It really affected everybody. And I think all of us as moderators felt that with the group, it was just a small thing that we could do to try to help people in a really bad situation. It was just a little thing, everything else was kind of, out of control, but we could go on there and we could talk to people and we could provide them with civil evidence-based discussion about vaccines. And it was just a little thing that we could do. And, over the years since we started the group, we have had, hundreds of people reach out to us to tell us that what they learned in the group actually helped them become more confident about their decision to vaccinate themselves or their children. And, we have seen that with the COVID vaccine too. We've seen people come and tell us, what I learned in the group made me want to go out and get vaccinated. And that to me, it's really, there's really no words. It's something that's so rewarding. And I think that all of us moderators in the group, we feel extremely, humbled and rewarded when people do say things like that to us. It just feels like we are making a difference.
Do you keep any statistics on that sort of thing? Like when people come back and say that it changed their mind or, anything like that. Do you have any statistics on that?
Yeah, we keep track. So when people do join the group, they tell us if they're pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, or on the fence. And we actually do keep track of that because we do like to see, first, we just wanted to see, how many of each group were joining the group. So we could kind of get a sense of our own demographics. But then once we realized when people were reaching out to us and telling us that they changed their stance, we realized it was a way to kind of keep track of that too. So we do. And there are obviously people who don't tell us, there are people who are out there who never communicate with us if they change their mind. So, we don't know the true numbers, but, over the years, there have been several hundred people who we have documented as changing their stance. And it's extremely rewarding.
That's fantastic. So how has Vaccine Talk made an impact in combating misinformation?
Well, I think there's not a lot of places on Facebook that does what we do. Facebook kind of likes to kind of blanket shut down misinformation, which can work, but it also has the effect of driving that misinformation underground. People go to other platforms that are not, as heavily, I guess, censored or, whatever, or moderated, as you could say, to disseminate that information. So it's still out there. The misinformation is out there because there are people who have a financial interest in spreading that misinformation. So that's going to keep happening. I think it's really important that we debunk it. And the group has, the way that the group is set up, it's really for debunking misinformation, and presenting the true story, presenting accurate information as a counter argument to what's being proposed that's incorrect. So, in that respect, I think what we're doing is really important. And I think that, there aren't a lot of places out there where people can get that kind of information. You can direct them to, the CDC all day long, but if they don't believe that the CDC is telling the truth, then they're not going to go there. So, we have to kind of meet them where they are, and where they are is on Facebook. So that's where we are.
Yep, absolutely. So kind of a follow-up question to that, because you had said that Facebook, so their algorithms are quite interesting. You had talked about how sometimes things can be just automatically flagged in a post. Sometimes just saying the word COVID can flag.
Yeah.
So in this, how are the algorithms affecting Vaccine Talk, and what do you guys do to combat some of that to make sure that the information is still getting out?
It's definitely challenging. It's very challenging. When we started the group, there really was no algorithm. You could pretty much say anything you wanted on Facebook. Obviously there are certain things you couldn't say, but for our purposes in our group, you could pretty much say anything. And then Facebook came under a lot of fire from the media and from politicians to kind of get a handle on the misinformation that was being spread on Facebook. So Facebook's response to that was pretty much to tweak their algorithms to shut down any sort of even a hint of a discussion about vaccines that wasn't 100% pro. And that kind of put our group in a little bit of a bind. We actually had the group disabled twice for a couple hours each time. The first time we had no communication from Facebook, the group was just gone. And we were kind of like, well, what do we do now? We'll try to start another group, I guess. And it was pretty stressful. We appealed. All we could do, as the group creator, I had an option to, appeal the disabling of the group. And after a couple hours, the group was back. So my appeal went through, but I had zero communication from Facebook during that entire time. We had no idea really what was going to happen or why or, anything. The second time that it happened, we had a little bit more communication from them. We could actually still view the group as admins, even though the group members couldn't see it. So we felt like we had a little bit more of a handle on the situation, but we still didn't have a direct line to anybody at Facebook. There's really nobody, you can't pick up the phone and call Facebook customer service. That doesn't exist. It was extremely frustrating. But what we've done to kind of combat that is we no longer allow people to put links directly in their posts. That was what was tripping us up. So basically what was happening was people would post a link and they would ask a question with it, per the group rules. They would say like, hey, my uncle sent me this link. Is it legit? And then Facebook their algorithm would flag that link as being misinformation and they would take the post down. But then because we as admins had approved that post, the group got in trouble, rather than the actual Facebook person who had posted it. So now, in order to prevent that from happening, we no longer allow links to be in posts. So what people can do is they can, write, my uncle sent me this link, which I'll post in the comments as soon as my post is approved. Can you please help me, understand it or debunk it? And then when they post it in the comments, the admins are no longer approving that comment. The Facebook user is commenting it themselves. So then the group is no longer a risk if that link is later deleted by Facebook. It's extremely annoying workaround, but it seems to be helping to keep the group from being shut down for a third time.
Well, that makes sense. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've heard across the board is that there's no real way to get any answers.
And exactly right. Yeah.
And even like you said, you had submitted, you had contested it, but then it was just back. And so at that time, you didn't really know what had caused it. So how can you fix something if you don't even know what the infraction was? And that can be extremely, extremely frustrating.
It was extremely frustrating. And actually what happened was a reporter that I'd been in contact with actually reached out to Facebook on our behalf and kind of demanded answers from them. And Facebook knows who we are. So, and they actually did tell her that, it was a mistake to disable our group, that they kind of, they're on board with what we're doing. And it was a mistake. They don't want to shut down groups like ours because we are having productive discussions and we are helping people. So I'm hoping that means that Facebook will kind of leave us alone in the future, but you never know. So we'll see.
That's great. That's great. So there's a couple of questions. I'm going to show this one first. This is from Shane. I've heard you and your group have been featured on news outlets like NPR, The Washington Post, and the New York Times. Is that true? And we know Shane already knows.
Shane knows that's true. Yes, it is true. Kind of during the height of COVID, when it kind of was starting to reach the news media about all the misinformation that was happening on COVID on Facebook and what Facebook was doing to counteract it. And at that time, a reporter from the Washington Post did reach out to me personally, and she had some questions about the group. I kind of talked to her back and forth over several months, and then we did have a write-up in the Washington Post. I was later interviewed on NPR, kind of based on my Washington Post article. And with the New York Times, that was a column, like a weekly tech column. They wrote about our Facebook group, and the reporter for that was actually the one who reached out to Facebook on our behalf to try to get some answers about why we were disabled. And so that was great to finally get them on the record to say that they've made a mistake. So.
That's fantastic. Wow. So I will say that I listened to the NPR interview. I couldn't think of the word. And it was really well done.
Oh, thank you.
You're very articulate, and there's some people that aren't really able to do that kind of thing. They just sound too nervous or whatever. You were just cool, calm, and collected. You did a great job. So I
Thank
wanted
you.
to definitely tell you that was great.
I can tell you that they recorded about an hour of audio for that interview and cut it down to about 4 minutes. So that can tell you about they could pull out 4 minutes of me sounding articulate and like I knew it. So
Well, I didn't know they had recorded an hour. Oh my goodness. Well, it was a really good one. And the articles were great too. Aaron Coalson has asked, what is the most prevalent misinformation or myth you have seen?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're asking about. But if you're asking about, the general childhood vaccine schedule, I would say the oldie but not a goodie is that vaccines cause autism. There is absolutely zero evidence that vaccines are linked to autism in any way, form, shape whatsoever. It's complete misinformation. And if you'd like to hear all about why, we'd love to tell you more about that in the group. If you're talking about COVID vaccines, we see a ton of misinformation about COVID vaccines causing all sorts of ailments and injuries and pretty much anything you can think of. It is newer vaccine. People are unfamiliar with the technology, and what they aren't familiar with is scary. So we really see lots of various types of misinformation spread about the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I've heard one recently where I think it was a doctor or somebody had the vaccine and then died from the vaccine. And if I'm not mistaken, that was it. He did die. The story is true, but it wasn't necessarily caused by the vaccine.
It's really hard in these kind of situations to determine, a causative factor. People unfortunately die every day. And, if I died, tomorrow, but I had gotten a vaccine today, it would really make sense in people's minds that the vaccine, had caused that. But most likely it didn't. What people have to understand is, the scientists who are looking at this, they're looking at, large populations of people, and, they have the tools to pick out, statistic anomalies. So if people are dying at a higher rate or becoming injured at a higher rate after receiving vaccines, we do have the tools to identify that. And, vaccines have been pulled off the market, because of adverse effects. It's rare, but it does happen, and there are tools to identify it. So if it really was happening the way that people say it happens, the COVID vaccine would not be given to people. But, we do have the tools to identify this.
Yep. The last question you've already answered, but I'll go ahead and show it just so that the audience knows. If you ask a question, I will still put it up even if it's already been answered. So producer Wes asked it, if you still have many autism claims about vaccines. So you did answer that you do have that. Are you seeing that diminish in that particular discussion with childhood scheduled vaccines?
So I would say that the autism claim is what we call a PRAT, a point refuted. Not sure what the rest of it stands for, but it's what we call a PRAT, and it's something that is going to come up time and time again. And we do still see it. It's so prevalent in our society, that link, and it's unfortunate that usually these symptoms of autism manifest themselves in children right around the time when they are getting vaccines. So, in our human brains are designed to identify patterns, and it's really easy to see that as a pattern when really it's completely unrelated. Right. So, unfortunately, we do still see that, and it is something that we still have to discuss.
Shane says point refuted 1,000 times.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you for the
assist. My last question for you is kind of a big one, so I saved it for last. Do you have any suggestions for how social media platforms can prevent or at least lessen the spread of misinformation and conspiracy theories?
So I think actually that Facebook is kind of on the right track with what they're doing. I think they're going about it in a kind of ham-fisted way, but they are on the right track. You really cannot have a platform where misinformation is allowed to spread rampant, because you get situations where, I mean, it's really bad. You can't have a situation where a platform is completely unmoderated. You have to moderate it. You have to make sure that the misinformation is not being disseminated. But the way that it's being handled right now, when it's just really, I mean, they're basically just, it really needs to be like a fine precision tool. And right now it's just a hammer whacking at everything. What they need is more people. They need actual humans to be analyzing content, to be giving it an actual human once over and determining what it is. And if something is being shared with the intention of debunking it or trying to get more information, then no, I don't think that content should be removed. I think it's a discussion that people need to have so they can learn. If everything's being removed, then there's no discussion to be had, but the information is still going to be out there. People are still going to find it online or on a different platform. So I think Facebook just needs to, really they need to invest in more people to do this work rather than relying on computers.
Yeah, I think you're right. It can also be very traumatizing for the workers to have to go through, because some of the things are just kind of ridiculous, and having to look through them, I can imagine that can be kind of cause some vicarious trauma with some of the things
Oh
that
yeah,
people post.
absolutely. Some of the stuff people post is just, absolutely awful for people to look at. We don't see too much of that, in our in what we're doing. But yes, there is horrible content out there, and that for sure, I think some of that be delegated to the computers. But for stuff like this, it really requires a little bit more precision and a little bit more of a human touch than what we're getting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to know, do you have any additional comments or closing thoughts that you would like our viewers to know or remember as far as our conversation has gone today?
Well, I would like to let people know that if they would like to join our group and find out a little bit more about us, they can find us at www.vaccinetalk.org. That URL directs directly to our Facebook group. And all you have to do to join is respond to the 3 questions and you will be admitted. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine. We know that the group format is not for everybody, but if you'd like to join a civil evidence-based discussion group, we are more than happy to have you.
Excellent. I know that Wes has been putting it in the chat several times. I would like to ask if any of our viewers are, we've had guests who are epidemiologists, virologists, biologists, scientists. If you would like to join them, especially if you have that type of knowledge, volunteer your time and help for a really good cause, because I think this is definitely something that needs to be replicated in across the board in all different topics. But this is a great way to get started with that. So I want to thank you for starting that group, for taking an incredible amount of time, I am sure, to try to create something that's useful and beneficial, especially about a topic that is so incredibly important. It's a life or death discussion, and so thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that.
Of course. Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here to talk to you and your audience about a topic that's very important to me.
Great. So for everyone else that's out there, if you enjoyed this and you want to see more of this, consider helping us. And you can do that really simply by liking, subscribing, hit the bell, share, get the word out so that other people can be a part of this. If you would like to help in a more direct way, consider joining our Patreon. And if you join as a patron, you can get special perks, such as receiving a link, and you can come on and be a part of the show just like me and Kate. And you can ask our guest a question. You don't have to wait for me to do it. You can just be a part of the show yourself. So consider doing that. And I want to thank our current patrons, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Bryce Aroni, Deborah Grace, Aaron Coalson, Phil Calderone, and me, myself. I want to thank our producers, Wes, Phil, and Kat, and the booking team, Wes, Raymond, and James. Remember to check out our other great shows, Secular Soapbox, Women Atheists Unloaded, Global Atheists, and The Bible Says What. In the meantime, remember to always think critically. Good night, everybody.